Hi everyone, so it's 9:05. I think we can get started. Thanks for joining this 3-weekly Iceberg Hell Community Sync. And today, I think we can begin from the one carryover item from the last time. It's the update event endpoint. So I believe Christian has created some issues for the different implementation tasks. I'm not sure if Christian is here to give us more update. Didn't see him in the meeting, so probably we can just treat this as like a general announcement of those issues being created, and everyone who is interested in that, please feel free to chime in and make your contribution. Okay, we can move to the first topic today, which is merging the fix to treat 503 arrows in the update table, same as other 500s. No, Prashant is the author of that PR, but for sure if he's here. If not, anyone wants to give some thoughts on that? Yes,
Ryan, I can talk about it a little bit. So apparently some Kubernetes services that are processing requests or at least acting as proxies will at times return a 500 as a 503 to the client. So while a 503 looked idempotent when we were putting together the spec, it turns out that it's not. So it is not an error that is safe to be retried because you could get something else returned as a 503. That means that we should not recommend retrying it, and that should help fix some of the issues. There is a concern that we're making changes to behavior in the spec, but this should be basically forward compatible, because if you don't retry something because it turns out it was unsafe, that's perfectly okay. You can have higher level retries or something like that. I don't think that anyone is relying on this behavior in a way that is going to cause serious operational issues. And certainly the existing serious operational issues outweigh those concerns. So I think the vote is currently passing. Thank you for everyone who has taken a look at this. It's good to get this fixed, and hopefully even into the 1.10.
So I also like see a lot of approvals in the PR. I believe we have a general consensus of merging that.
Yeah, I'm squeaky wheel here. I'm definitely running into this and would like to see it. I can patch this in, but I'd like to see it in the next release. So I was going to squeak on that.
This is a quick check. Mark, what catalog are you seeing that with? This is with your own implementation?
Yeah, it's a custom risk catalog implementation. Envoy is the proxy that's causing this. We have MTLS set up so that we need to be able to connect, and we have a proxy for some of the clients that are more difficult to do that with. And these are the clients that are having the issue. And we can't, you can rewrite this in Envoy, so that's another option, but it's better to get it in here.
Yeah, that was basically we had different technologies, but the exact same thing happening, and we ended up rewriting that layer to remap them to something else, but it's still unpredictable, I think, now.
So this has been kind of a consistent problem that we've had. I mean, we actually went through the same thing with 502 and I believe 504. And I think the main thing is, like, especially with the commit path, we want to be really conservative about when we go and clean up. We've had this, this is the whole reason commit state unknown exists. So we even had this prior to any REST catalog implementations. And I think just across the board, we want to be conservative when we don't quite know what happened. And deleting files can wedge a table state, because the downside of not cleaning up is that orphan files has to do more work in the future, right? And the downside of cleaning up too aggressively is you kill a table, and then somebody needs to figure out how do we get this operational again. So those are pretty extreme.
Should we also talk about the item potency key proposal while we're on this?
Well, I thought Swashin was here. I can give an overview if she's not on at the moment. I think we were looking in basically two directions here. One is kind of a client retry mechanism, which is, I got a 503 or something. I want to know if I can retry, and to do that, I need to be able to tell the catalog specifically what I'm retrying, so the catalog can disambiguate that request, that retry request, from a completely new request. And then the other kind of avenue we were looking at is, can we disambiguate based on the request content? So if I'm attempting to add a snapshot that already exists, maybe that shouldn't be a failure, because obviously I'm the only one who generated that snapshot identifier. So maybe it shouldn't be called a failure. I don't know. That's kind of similar to what we're doing right now in the Hive client, where when we say we're a little safer in the Hive client. So in the Hive client, when you get a commit state unknown, we basically look to see if the metadata.json that you attempted to commit is there in history. And if it is, we know, hey, it succeeded. We don't have to do anything crazy here or give you a commit state unknown. We actually know what the state is. Where that has weaknesses, of course, because we can only do that for metadata that exist in the history. But it's definitely better than nothing. Currently in the REST, because we send table updates and we don't actually have a unique identifier for the group that we have just sent, we have no way of knowing if that group was committed or not. So those are the two kind of avenues I think we're thinking about.
So I mean, just so that I can understand the scenarios here, there's the scenario that a server returns a 503 because actually some sort of like upstream gateway or something like that actually returned a 503. The client is unsure, and we're now saying, hey, well, drop the work you've done. As opposed to the other scenario where the server is saying, hey, 503, I'm overloaded. Right? Like that's actually a server saying, I got too many commits coming in. I need more time to process this. I'm going to send you a 503, but I actually want you to retry. That's perfectly safe. I haven't processed anything. So like,
it's a step beyond that. This is, we have the unknown exception at the client side. Like we have no idea what to do at that point. So like we got some exception or 5.0 code. So like you can imagine this could also just be like, we currently have the code in the REST client, but like if you have I don't know, a socket closed exception or something, like that's a commit state unknown at that point. And we have no way of actually doing anything from that point on. We also have no way of telling the client, like, this is what you should do to make sure that something happened or didn't happen. So I'm trying to make sure that we capture the broad case here if we can.
I think my concern is that like and I haven't thought a ton about this yet, so I'm just reacting based off hearing about it like very recently. My concern is it requires a handshake from both the client and the server, because the client can't just send that, get a 503 or some code, and then assume I can send it again and the server will tell me that it's okay or it's not, because I don't actually know that the server understands this thing. So I, as a client, like I already need to know that the server is okay with this. And then the other option would be to say, well, if the server already knows how to handle this, or certain cases in the scenario, like if it can send it like a 503 code back, it can also send a retry header if it's okay to retry. And so it's just like, well, how narrow of a space is this particular thing solving for? And it has the additional complexity that both the client and the server need to know they both support this thing.
Yeah, I think the idempotency idea needed both sides to be provide this ID by the clients. Otherwise, like the client itself, like server itself does not know which request is actually idempotent, right? The same from the same request. The server can only reconcile when it sees these two requests actually the same request. And another idea, the client-side only reconciliation is that a client need to reload, which is no matter whether the server can support that, a client just reload and check. Of course, it will not cover all the cases where it can really understand, okay, my commits already succeeded because something else will happen. But in certain cases, can just reload and see, okay, my commits already succeed, and I don't have to just delete everything I have.
Yeah, the only reason that I kind of pick at this is just around the narrowness of it. And then the other thing is like, we really need to make it like its own special thing as opposed to like a request ID. Because like most systems that I can think of right now that will like say, hey, if I've already processed a request, you know, like I don't know if that's 208 or, you know, something like that. Like you have a request ID. And then if I'm making a commit twice with the same request ID, you know, I'm just kind of questioning, do we need idempotency key?
So I would say the idempotency key is the request ID. It's called a few different things, and actually, so there were two things that were discussed. One was I think that's an excellent point about the server needing to publish its capability, right? So that is going to be that is a period of pain, certainly, if we don't get that right. But you know, I think it's a good thing that the notion of server capabilities is already, you know, now established within Iceberg REST, right? So I think like that's certainly one avenue I could think of, right? Like you could publish it as a capability. The more important thing is that the longest term actually does reach like some good state, right? And I think so to the second thing you were talking about, yeah. So assuming that the server is also aware of it, and you know, I guess the idea would be to have the general to tackle the general case, regardless of like we could always still have even smarter handling, I guess, of particular known pushback cases or things like that. But I think to the idea of tackling the general case, one thing we also noticed as part of this draft, I think it's included now. It's also there is a draft RFC with the from the IETF for RFC on this idempotency key, and it's nice that you mentioned request ID, and this means luckily this working group has helped do a lot of the homework for us already, right? Because they call out the existing pattern across different managed services. For example, there's even like in the draft, there's like Google standard payments. They say, oh look, in this API, there's a property called request ID, but it's the same thing as this idempotency key. And then here, I guess the direction of this working group is to standardize on the terminology idempotency key, and it is an HTTP header. It's nice. There's also a lot of edge cases that one could forget. That and if we come up with a new one, we can even submit it to the GitHub of this of the draft. I'll even repost it in here, right? And Washington's doc has this in the paragraph as well. So I think there's trickiness around the semantics of whether error responses are also replayable, but also here we probably don't need to diverge from standards that look like they're starting to emerge. I mean, granted, it's not like it's 100% standardized yet, but we can have some gravitational pull towards just leaning on prior art, unless we know that we materially diverge for explicit reasons.
So I really like this idea because it gives us a way around a lot of these transient errors. So Dan, what you were saying is, if I'm returning a 503, hey, slow down, back off, then I can also send a retry header to say this is retryable. But the lost connection issues, we don't know whether that made it to the service because the connection was dropped, and so the service may have committed. If we know that the service supports this idempotency, then it makes that whole class of exceptions retryable. So I really like that, and would support moving forward with this, to make a whole bunch of things where otherwise if you cannot determine, then there are two things to do, right? You can either load the table state and check, hey, did this actually go through? Which isn't great, because you don't know that all of your changes were applied. You just know something like, well, that snapshot ID looks like it exists now. And we would need to basically diff and check, hey, did the table state get updated? That's kind of ugly. Whereas this would be, I know I can make this request again and the server will dedupe. So I think that those are good reasons to take this on. The other worst case here is that it actually fails a job that took 20 minutes or an hour to complete. And if we can reduce or basically increase the reliability with this, then I think that would be a really good thing to do. So I think I'm supportive of this. And I think it's probably a pretty good idea to do it. We do need to think about how to introduce it. And I would say, why not just a v2 commit endpoint where, that way, if you have the v2 endpoint, you know that the service supports idempotency, and you can commit to either v1 or v2. v2 must support the idempotency token and deduplicate these things, and v1 does not.
Okay, so I have a couple of things. I'm not actually opposed to this. I'm trying to explore and understand what value we're getting out of adding this additional thing. And I want to make sure that if we are doing it, we aren't inventing something new as opposed to using something that is more standard or well accepted as a practice. So it's good to see that like people are starting to talk about item potency key as header. I like the behaviors that you can get out of this. I am a little concerned about like what it means for implementers and like how do I track these requests? Because now like we're adding this additional like capability that almost puts an onus on the catalog to say, hey, not only do I need to apply these commits, I need to retain some history about the operations and IDs that were performed. Everyone that I execute now, I have to check against some series or some log to decide, hey, was this already applied or not? Like that seems like it could add a serious amount of complexity. But I guess if implementers want to go down that path, they potentially can. But I would not underemphasize like how burdensome that can be on implementations, but they don't have to implement it.
And you need a correct answer because this would avoid saying commit state unknown. So you actually need to know whether the client can delete things.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. So the service, unless we want to introduce a commit state unknown from the service, which would be weird.
In terms of the question about like adding a new endpoint, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense in terms of like what we're saying that we include here. Like this is an additional header that includes some value. And if anything, like I think it highlights we might have a couple gaps, or we might need to think about how we express capabilities from the catalog. Because like right now, we went through the whole effort of defining like how do we expose capabilities, but they're actually somewhat limited in that we can only express capabilities in terms of endpoints. I think there are different ways that we could think about like, well, how do we expose capabilities, or how do we define certain things within the construct of that capabilities endpoint? But I don't know that I would want to bump a like commit version just for this feature. I'd like to figure out a way to do that without.
I think we are far too scared about introducing new endpoints with new requirements because we've been hovering around a new load table endpoint for quite a while. And what is the huge drawback of adding an endpoint?
It's just like it needs to be substantive, and I don't feel like this is to that level, right? So because if we say, hey, let's iterate through these versions and we'll have commit table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for every small change that we make, then we have a real problem about, well, which one do I actually use?
This is the second time in 3 years.
I know.
I think that can be hashed. Like I think I can think of some pros and cons of either one. Like for having a separate endpoint, you could also configure intermediate proxies, like we were talking about Envoy before, right? Like you could make them also respect the behavior more easily without deeper semantics, without having to understand deeper semantics. On the other hand, I mean, you could also. I agree with at least having some form of positive acknowledgement from the server to indicate whether this thing is having any effect, or are they just ineffective goggles? Like, so you would need, you could return a response header as an ACK to say like, oh, by the way, my server actually gave you this 200. Like
that doesn't work though. Like the response header, you could get from a regular service that said, yep, I did that commit again, right? Or sorry, no, you wouldn't get the response header, but in a 500 case, you would not know whether you can retry.
That's true. So you won't know whether to retry, but then you'd have to make the client. Oh yeah, so you'd have to change the client anyways. But yeah, that's true. If you didn't clean up, you could figure it out later on whether the server gave you the 409 with item potency in mind, or whether it gave you a 200 with item potency in mind. But
I think if you're changing the behavior of response codes, that to me rises to the level of a V2 endpoint, right? Because we're saying, oh, okay, well, if I get this capability from the service, I'm going to treat all these 500 response codes as commit state unknown. If I get a capability that says I support item potency, then I'm going to retry all of those. That worries me. Yeah,
I think that one thing to consider though is, I think even as called out in parts of the spec, right? The parts of the item potency spec, it might still be necessary to have a commit state unknown. The server just has to be more choosy about commit state unknown types of exceptions. So in particular, as was mentioned, right, like one of the things that's required on the server side is storing a history of these idempotency keys. And generally, these are understood not to be infinite. So I think that there's even some mention of, expiration. So there's still a time window. The idea is that at least this time window can be set arbitrarily high given the capabilities of the server. But the unknown state would still exist, which in a way also makes it feel like it kind of blurs the lines between whether it's a new behavior or not. Because today servers can already, like, if they know that there was some form of internal retry with some proxy component that is owned by the service, there could be logic already that says there might be internal usage of idempotency keys, right, for various use cases. So
hold on, Dennis, like I'm a little concerned about something you said there. Like if we say, hey, the idempotency key and the return codes could still result in a commit state unknown. If I use an idempotency key, like I have to trust that the server will then adhere to that in the future. Like I can't. Like
that's not the contract of the idempotency key, though. So the contract of it is that if I think that the contract is that you definitely need to be able to reject that is the expiration time duration, I think, is part of it, right? Like I think this is one of those things where there's no perfect solution, but as long as the client and server adhere to like there's the known duration, the window, and then you set timeouts appropriately, right? Then you can protect against a well-established set of error cases. So for example,
I agree. Like we still have to decide on the client whether we're going to delete the uncommitted metadata. So we need to know, was this committed or was this not committed? Or is there a uncertain state and I don't delete that metadata?
Yeah.
So like if you try a commit and then you come back 24 hours later and you try it again, like we need to be able to say, I don't know, it's been 24 hours, right? So you need some sort of response to the client that says, I can't determine whether or not this commit went through. So, well, actually, in that case,
how do you determine when I get a request that comes through and I have an idempotency key that I don't know? Is that because like, hey, the first request is actually blocked by my gateway, or is it because it's timed out?
So in those cases, it's up to the client actually to know whether it can retry with its idempotency key based on the server configuration. So like the server has to say, you are allowed to retry as many times as you want within whatever my duration of retention is for idempotency keys from your first request. Because that is the maximum amount of time that the idempotency key would live in the server. And after that point, then you have to be like, well, I got my last response was unknown or whatever. I can't retry anymore. And now I have to go down my unknown path. So that was why I was suggesting, I think it's in the doc now, like the server has to advertise, not only do I support this capability, but what is the maximum duration the client can use to take advantage of it. Because the server can't tell the difference between a brand new request and not, but the client can't. The client knows when it first tried.
That seems reasonable to me, and why we should follow whatever the RFC says, because there is prior art, and
yeah,
yeah,
they have it in this little section 2.3. Yeah. So the resource may require time-based idempotency keys to be able to purge or delete a key upon its expiry. The resource should define such a policy and publish it in this documentation.
Admittedly, the RFC doesn't give you a very good recipe for exactly how to implement it in your server. But this is where the links to other prior art, help at least seed some ideas, and maybe we'll invent something new. Who knows? But there's also a lot of prior art.
So I think we can keep following up this topic as while Huaxing is also like working on the draft proposal for that. Yeah. Just check if anyone has any other topic to bring up in today's meeting. Yeah, Prashant, please go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to touch base on, I think we briefly discussed about it already, the client-side reconciliation. Meanwhile, we have an idempotency key specified and established. So I totally agree. I mean, things like schema update, for example, expiration of snapshot, like there is no consistent way to define if my commit succeeded or not. But there are still some cases where we can say that, hey, if my request was to just add a snapshot, given my base snapshot was this very simple kind of thing, we can save those commit to go from unknown to success. We will not make it from unknown to failed, but we will just can upgrade it from unknown to success for a very simple case that we know. So for that, I did a small write-up, and I think we discussed as a community right now as well. So what are your thoughts on like having at least that kind of thing written in the REST client that we have, only to help in the cases we are 100% sure of, with a restriction that we only go from unknown to positive state. We don't go from unknown to failed state just in case if we are wrong. And we only go from unknown to success state when we are very 100% sure in a very corner case. What are the thoughts on this one?
That sounds pretty reasonable to me.
I like this idea. I also wonder if we should formalize some of the mechanisms we already have in Spark Streaming and Flink, and also in the Kafka Connect sync, of like using a snapshot property to indicate, like a client can indicate what an operation is. I know they both use different mechanisms right now. I'm wondering if we should kind of standardize like a client-side token that you can place in the metadata that represents an operation.
It requires a snapshot.
We could do something like, if you, you might have multiple, right? Because you could have multiple snapshots being committed at the same time. And if you did that, you would have to have some way of combining those into a single key. So I think it's probably easiest and best to just generate this when you get the commit request in the catalog client, right? Generate a new thing that says, hey, someone's trying to commit this. That would be probably simpler to keep those decoupled, because the guarantees, I was also thinking through, like, can we implement idempotency tokens with snapshot metadata?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is no. So I think it's probably best not to do that. But I like that also this is mostly service side, right? Like, you do need this communication to say, here's my maximum amount of time you can use a single idempotency token. But I like that the only client responsibility is generate a unique ID and include it as a header in every retry. That's a pretty lightweight thing on the client. It's optional for clients; they don't have to do it, but it could, really increase reliability and avoid expensive failures. So I like that a lot.
I think, in that vein, I wonder if, with that simple client-side supplied information, whether the server can do additional things that are still useful beyond this particular retry behavior. So one thing I'm thinking about is, given the fact that moving to REST the REST protocol meant that the server now creates the metadata JSON file. That meant that one of the ways that people could reason and debug about things from legacy implementations went away, which was, people could have used the metadata file name as sort of the authoritative change, right? Like even if it's a multi-snapshot change, the metadata JSON was authoritative. There's not an equivalent field right now anywhere in the table metadata, except possibly the metadata log, right? So one thing we could consider is it worthwhile to put some kind of open-ended diagnostic info in the metadata log tuple about the request that caused this? Like it could be at least be a timestamp of the request, which might differ from the server side timestamp, right? That could be like, or I guess the server had to know that it had to receive the request already, but it could still differ from like the commit time of the file. But it could.
I would not be a fan of using timestamps for this.
Yeah,
but
it wouldn't be an alternative. By the way, I'm just thinking like other or like client info. It could be you might put in the user agent. You might put in, and if the idempotency key is available, you might say, look, this metadata log entry corresponded to this idempotency key. Then in retrospect, somebody could piece together what happened by looking at those.
We also need to think about what is a server concern versus table concern. I think that the metadata log was a hack for basically working around the fact that we had a catalog level concern, like cleaning up these old metadatas, and people wanted clients to do that work. So I'm not a huge fan of the metadata log. I think that it would be fairly reasonable to say, hey, maybe we put this, because we are writing something, maybe the service can keep track of these in the same way that it keeps track of metadata versions, or maybe it keeps track of a window of them. I think we would need to think about what we're trying to accomplish here, and then design a way, say, is this something that should be part of table metadata? I'm skeptical on that for the same reason the metadata log was a weird idea. Yeah. I think that we can think through how to expose this mechanism and potentially make it so that a client could say, oh, okay, well, I see from a retry that this is already done. But I think that the existing proposal using some existing RFC, well-defined headers, prior art, like that's probably the safer way to go.
Yeah, so I just want to add, I think we should not discount the metadata JSON in the sense that because in the REST protocol, like the properties part, if we add properties, because we are adding just the diff of the properties, they are actually concurrency safe. So we kind of did a similar formulation for kind of Snowflake, where we had this idempotency key. And we can reason about why it is concurrency safe and how we can delete them once we have verified the operation has been successful on the catalog side. So maybe I can add something around that. I think we can build something that is safer within metadata JSON properties.
I just want to double click on the metadata log, because there's no lineage about that. Everything just order by, the only thing right now you can do is order by its timestamp, which is not a reliable way to say, okay, I actually know the history of which happens first, which happens later, and their relationship between them. So to go back to the snapshot summary, I think it's much more reliable because we already have a nice lineage between each individual snapshot. And if the only thing we care about is snapshots, right? We don't care about DDLs, then we actually...
Do we though? I mean, from a server replayability side, it does seem like we actually do care about associating these also with, I mean, like one reason I was talking about the metadata log was exactly because like thinking about, you know, the ones that aren't captured in snapshots, like the DDLs specifically, right? But maybe we don't, I don't know.
Yeah, the point is, if we really wanted to have something like that, then we probably go back to the previous. Like I think we have this discussion before. Say, okay, do we apply lineage to the metadata JSON file logs?
Right.
If that's the case, then we can rely on that. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to do that.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think if we capture snapshot cases, schema evolution is frequent and definitely a desirable operation for the completeness part of things. But the frequent is addition of snapshot, because most of the times the writers which we see are like the streaming writers going into the state, while the watermark things are like effectively built on things like Flink and Kafka Connect, but there are still zombie gating on how you update the watermark. So corner cases on that. So definitely not 100% solution from the client side reconciliation part of view, but as a reasonable one to help at least the streaming writers to go forward.
I think aside from schema evolution, though, like one problem with not having the lineage of the metadata logs is that it implies we don't care about relative ordering of some things that can, so like maintenance, for example, maintenance and other like snapshot branch commits, then it's not one linear lineage, but of the snapshots, but you do effectively still have a serializable metadata log, or you know, actual commit. You're saying we don't.
So this is the problem with having the metadata log. It looks like something you can use, but you don't have anything to say what the relationships between these metadata files are. And we don't want relationships between metadata files. We don't want people going back and diffing them. This is not a place for table metadata. The table metadata is contained entirely within one current state, and that is the current metadata JSON. So anything that we want to do there, including like lineage, you know, we should track there. I think that it is dangerous to start using something that was intended for like, oh, let's go and clean up the files that we left behind, to try and back into, oh, hey, what order did changes happen and things like that. Like if we want to start tracking things like when did schema changes happen, then we can add features to the table format to track that. Like when a schema change happens, you need to go commit a empty snapshot to that branch. That way you can see, you know, in the snapshot history, you know, when things happened. But I don't think that we should consider the the metadata JSON log to be at all useful or canonical in terms of what has changed.
To clarify, I think I totally agree with that, right? Like I think I agree that the part definitely looks like a hack. I think the part I feel more strongly about is having that commit log somewhere, and I think maybe you're right that it can't fit in the same place. I don't know. Like,
well, I mean, I think that now we're talking about that should be in the events log.
Yeah, it starts sounding like the events log.
Right. And so we should be designing and building mechanisms for this sort of thing. The metadata log, I don't think is that.
Right. And are we saying though that we do think that event log would never have a presence in the metadata JSON? Because you could imagine that, you know, if you wanted it to be recoverable. If you want your event log to be recoverable, more like a commit log, I guess.
I think that we're moving away from having more historical information in metadata JSON, right? Like there's already a lot of historical information in metadata JSON, which is one of the biggest criticisms of how things work right now. So, trying to version the world and keep everything there, I think is probably not the best path. There can be other mechanisms for doing this, like, log-based systems, introducing catalog sequence numbers, things like that, I think are the right solutions to these problems rather than expanding the role of metadata JSON. The role of metadata JSON is to have a single self-contained state of the table, not historical state, right? And that there is some history there because you might need to know, what the state changes were in terms of data over the last few versions for streaming purposes, for your change data feeds, feed calculations. But I don't think that we want to do that in a more broad sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually, like, for what it's worth. Like, I think more shredding of the metadata JSON is probably more better.
So I'll take this moment to give a shout out to the events endpoint stuff, which I think is looking better. That could also, always use reviews. And I think we're also looking for people to volunteer to add the events endpoint draft, start implementing that, and get that into the reference implementation. So if you're interested in contributing to this area, the events endpoint would be a great thing to start working on. Could be a fun use of variant as well if you wanted to use variant to hold all these event logs.
Yeah, just want to another quote. Any final topic item want to discuss? Otherwise, I think we can end 10 minutes early today.
I just have one small question. I think we have a bunch of discussion around the FGAC and the policy decision emission. I'm curious if anyone working on the last consensus. It seems like we wanna load the table, emit the policy decision. I just want to double check if anyone is actually working on that proposal.
Yes, we still do. We're still working. I sent an email out today mentioning the state TLDR as we are working on it and considering all the things. So
and I'd like to encourage people to, work in parallel, work together. We don't assign issues to avoid exclusive ownership of things because that tends to make us, move pretty slowly. So, just work with one another, discuss who can work on what. Like if you can go and draft changes or draft a PR, I think always feel like you should be, you're like you can do that. Yeah, thank you guys.
If there's any other topic item, so I'll just call out this to be the end of today's meeting. Thanks everyone for joining today's catalog think. I wish we can see you 3 weeks later. Thanks.
Thanks.